Hello, everyone, and welcome to Your Voice, Your Future. I'm Armstrong Williams, your moderator. Let me welcome our guests who are in the studio. Bruce Fein, welcome back, constitutional lawyer. Kierran Young, welcome back to the broadcast. And then Todd O'Neill, managing editor of the Daily Signal. We welcome you back. Let me start with you, Tyler. We often have focused so much on the presidential race and have often overlooked the very important House and Senate races. Let's start with the Senate and start with Arizona and Kari Lake and Ruben Gallego. How do you see that race shaping up?
Yeah, that's a very open question. Arizona is one of the big states that we're watching in this cycle. And Kari Lake is perhaps not the strongest of the candidates the Republicans could have gone for. But what we're seeing in Arizona, like we're seeing in many other states across the country, is that Americans do not feel like their lives have markedly improved over the past 4 years. And when you ask that question, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? Most Americans don't answer yes. So even though, Kari Lake has her struggles, Arizona is still likely to be a competitive race, especially in a presidential year. So I'm not sure whether, which side is entirely favored in Arizona, but I do know that overall, if you look at the Senate map, Republicans are very strongly positioned in this cycle, and that's only going to be boosted by the fact that this is a presidential year, driving out big turnout when there's a referendum on the current administration.
So let me just remind our listeners tonight that the country's next president is certainly going to need a friendly Congress to make their policy dreams a reality. But control of the two chambers remains deeply uncertain with just 43 days until election. And whether the outcome will be a party trifecta in the nation's capital, many people doubt that. Now, recent projections tilt in favor of Republicans taking the U.S. Senate, an already closely divided chamber that is sure to be near evenly split again in the next Congress. And though Vice President Kamala Harris appears to, if you believe it, NBC, over everyone else, is that she's gaining and widening her lead, even though she injected a jolt of energy in the Democratic Party, prosecutors still say the prize winner of the House is anybody's guess. And listen, the House is highly close and competitive, and many people could really go in it either way. Bruce, let me come back to you in Pennsylvania with Dave McCormick, hedge fund executive, challenging Bob Casey. And Fetterman saying, as recent as a few days ago, that Donald Trump is strong in Pennsylvania.
Well, he is. I'd like, if I could, for a moment, to sound a little bit of a dissident note with regard to the importance of controlling Congress if you're in the White House. It's unfortunate, but over the last decades, Congress has shrunk in its powers. It's given away huge amounts of authority to the president, who rules by executive order, executive agreement, does things on his own, spends money on his own. It's on both parties. And so you'll see that even President Biden, who does not control the House, it's in the hands of the Republicans, he basically has his agenda. It's certainly not a Republican agenda. And he's able to rule almost unilaterally. How many times has he gone back to the well and had his student debt forgiveness program about 4 or 5 times?
Let's come back to Pennsylvania, now, David McCormick.
Let's go to Pennsylvania.
Yes, thank you.
I think Bob Casey is a very personable candidate. I think even though there's some coattails effect that apply in presidential elections, it's not invariably the case. And simply because Trump is strong in Pennsylvania, it doesn't automatically transfer to a challenger. So I think that we need to recognize, especially in a presidential race that's going to be a cliffhanger, it's not going to be an LBJ over Goldwater or FDR over Alf Landon, that the president could, former President Trump could win, and still Casey could win as well.
You know, Joe Manchin is certainly not running again, and it's, to some, Kierran, it's a foregone conclusion that a Republican will win that seat. Yeah. Your thoughts?
A Republican will win that seat, which puts the Democrats at heavy disadvantage when it comes to the national map in terms of the United States Senate. We're also the Democrats are also defending John Tester as well in the state of Montana, which is a state that is likely to go for Republicans as well.
So you think Tim Sheehy's going to win?
Yeah, I think that the map, as it currently stands, the Democrats are playing defense, and they have much more to defend than just your typical battleground state like Pennsylvania. They also have traditionally Republican states that used to be senators that caucus with them that are going to put the control of the Senate really at stake here in the November election.
You know, Tyler, Maryland, where Governor Wes Moore is putting all his creds on the line to elect Angela Alsobrook, but polls show that former popular governor Larry Hogan, who detests Donald Trump, is a formidable candidate, and Maryland, for the first time in a long time, could turn red from blue.
Yeah, it's a very, this race is very interesting on all sorts of levels, particularly in Maryland, where you have that race. The other issue is North Carolina.
No, let's say no. You and Bruce love to pivot. No, let's stick with that race.
Let's stick with that race.
Please. Yeah, we're gonna get to those. Let's stick with that, okay?
Now, Larry Hogan is very
thank you.
popular governor in Maryland, and that I think he does have a good chance of outperforming President Trump there. I mean, former President Trump is not scheduled to win Maryland anytime soon. But, when we look at this election, we're seeing an interesting switch on the Democratic side, where suddenly you have President Biden being swapped out for Kamala Harris. That's going to strengthen a few races. But I also think that it's hard to have coattails when you're an empty suit. And Kamala Harris is such a flip-flopper that when you look at the national elections, when you look at the state trickle-down effects, I don't think they're going to have the same impact that having former President Trump on the top of the ticket will in states where he is more popular.
Sure.
In the state of Maryland, I do believe that the coattails of Vice President Harris and the enthusiasm that she's pushed out in a very strongly Democratic state will help Angela Alsobrooks, and I do not think that Larry Hogan will be able to use the anti-Trump enthusiasm that exists on the Republican side in order to get himself elected. I think Angela Alsobrooks, the Prince George's County executive, is a formidable candidate who has a lot of enthusiasm in different pockets around the state, including a stronghold in Prince George's County. So I think that's a very interesting race, but I do think that it favors the Democrats in a way that some people might not realize right now because of the enthusiasm around a Democratic presidential candidate.
But I think that the point is correct that Kamala Harris doesn't have a huge coattail effect because she's not an overwhelmingly popular and known figure like other candidates, a Ronald Reagan, even a Dwight Eisenhower, Franklin Roosevelt. So while it may be true in Maryland, which probably hasn't voted for a Republican president in the last 50 years, in other states, I think Kamala Harris's candidacy is not going to have the impact on the senatorial side as it may in Maryland.
Reagan was the last. Let's go to Michigan, where it's very interesting. Alyssa Slotkin and Mike Rogers are battling it out for that Senate seat. Where do you see that leaning, Michigan? And you had a major mayor in Michigan just today come out and endorse Trump, which surprised a lot of people. And the Muslim vote is very upset with Harris and Biden because they feel he's no different than the Trump-Vance ticket when it comes to their agenda and supporting the Palestinian cause, Bruce.
Well, that's true. I think the one figure that you omitted, Armstrong, is the governor, Gretchen Mitch, and she's very popular and she's very strong Democrat. And she ousted a Republican, even though she was relatively inexperienced. She is well-liked, and that kind of offsets some of the elements that you referred to. So I think it's an open shot there. I think that either Republican or Democrat could win in Michigan. Historically, it's been Democrat because it's heavily unionized. It was the center of the auto industry. That's kind of a museum piece today. But still, I do believe that the critical element is, to the Arab vote that is totally disenchanted with both Biden and Harris? Are they going to just sit it out and not care whether the Republicans take it over? Because to be candid, there's not an inch bit of difference between what Trump said he would do in Palestine and Gaza and West Bank and Harris and Vance and Waltz. It's the same.
Tyler, it's interesting. Nevada is a battleground state, okay? And Jackie Rosen and Sam Brown is battling it out. But many people believe that Republicans will win Nevada. Is this just hearsay, or what is it?
I think Republicans can win Nevada. I'm not confident that they will. I mean, Nevada, as you mentioned, is a swing state, and both presidential candidates are battling for it. These no tax on tips policies that they came out are very tailored to Las Vegas. And, you know, when you look at a state like Nevada, I've been following, you know, the congressional races in Nevada have been very close. And we've been watching, this state go from red to blue to back again in some very important areas. And so it is very plausible to me that Nevada will go red, but we have to see. And many of these states, I think it's important to say the Senate map favors Republicans, but each race is distinct. And that's why I think like Larry Hogan has strengths in Maryland, and not just, regardless of Trump, but I think Trump is going to drive out some people who may not necessarily like Hogan, but then it'll also support many Republicans who like.
Let me get the last one in here before we turn to the House when we return from break. Tammy Baldwin, the Republicans had their convention in Wisconsin, in Milwaukee, but Tammy Baldwin is battling it out with Eric Hove in the state of Wisconsin. And Baldwin, Kierran, is a two-term senator. Can she hold on for the Democrats?
I do believe that we're in an environment that does, in some cases, favor incumbents, and I do believe she will be able to hold on. I do think she's a very strong politician and has a very strong base, so I think that it'll really be a turnout election, and whether or not the Democrats can get their base enthused enough to turn out in the cities that they need in order to win these elections. I really do think it comes down to...
So quickly, before we turn to the House, when we come back, will the Republicans and Democrats win the Senate?
I think the Republicans will.
Oh, interesting. Tyler?
Yeah, I think the Republicans will.
Wow, Bruce? Oh, no. Just an answer. I got to get the break. Bruce?
I think it'll be a tie, and whoever wins the White House will cast the deciding vote to control the Senate.
So you're not going to answer. Okay, so we'll be back to talk about the House when we return. I'm Armstrong Williams. This is Your Voice, Your Future. Don't go away. So it is believed that the Republicans can pick up Pennsylvania and Arizona and Nevada Senate seats. It's quite interesting. Let me start with you again, Tyler. Talk about the House. Where are the Republicans' strengths, the Democrats' strengths, their weaknesses? What do you think will tip the scale?
Yeah, the House is very much an open question. So I think all three of us are bullish on Republican chances in the Senate. The House is anyone's game. And the House is... what we've been seeing in the past few years is some Republican dissension in the current House. And many on the more conservative side want to hold leadership accountable and push them into directions of more conservative policy. But unfortunately, this gives the impression that Republicans cannot govern. And I don't think that is an accurate impression, but that's the way a lot of people see it. And so one of the reasons why Mike Johnson is going with this 3-month CR is to say, look, let's have this settled. Let's not have a government shutdown, and let's go into the election. I'm among many who think that having the act in there to make sure that illegal aliens don't vote in this election was a good idea, but that one couldn't clear. I think the House is going to follow the presidential race. I think it's going to be very close one way or another. I think we could see a trifecta with former President Trump re-entering the White House, a Republican House and a Republican Senate, but both of extremely thin, razor-thin margins.
Kierran?
I think that the House is likely to fall into control of the Republican Party or the party that wins the presidential contest. I think that part of the problem that the Republicans are going to run into is this playing games with the government shutdown. I think that it'll cause them very dearly in the general election, both on the presidential level and in House races up and races up and down the ballot. It shows that they're very, very callous when it comes to the taxpayers' dollars and wasting and abusing them in ways that I believe, will show will tell the American people that they cannot be trusted in a lot of ways. I think when you talk about defaulting on the debt and you start playing games with, our country's credibility when it comes to paying our bills, I think that it causes a moment of national reflection for our country, and I think that we'll have a very serious reckoning on Election Day, because I don't think that the American people want to see continued game playing by politicians on their behalf.
The 6th District of Maryland here in our backyard could flip Republican, Bruce, and also the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, has proposed a plan to extend the shutdown.
Well, he's agreed to have the CR carry over to December. He's basically capitulated. And this is one of the great ironies. I know you're going to chastise me for not directly responding. But at present, even though the Republicans have a majority in the House, the only bills that Mike Johnson get passed have to have a majority of who? The Democrats. Because he has to resort to special order requiring a 2/3 vote, because his Rules Committee will not vote a rule out for regular order. So basically we have, even though the Republicans are nominally in control of the House, the Democrats in the House are the ones that are needed to pass any legislation. So I don't know what that means in terms of impacting the policy.
It shows bipartisanship. That's what it means, Bruce.
Well,
and that's what the American people want.
I do not think that if the American people voted a majority of Republicans into the House, they want the Democrats to control the agenda. That seems on its face to be contradictory.
What about, isn't that only because Democrats have marginal seats?
I mean, I don't understand what the question is.
They're marginal seats. Their lines are thin too.
Yeah, of course.
They could be ousted.
Yeah, of course, on both sides.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I think that given the record of both parties, that the American people are not enthusiastic about either Republicans or Democrats. But they got to choose between one or the other. And that means the electoral results are very fragile and they can flip.
But they're also given a pass to vote with the Speaker.
Well, they could vote for the Speaker, or some of them could say, as some of the Republicans are, why are we having the Speaker who goes along and is a poodle to Hakeem Jeffries, who's the minority leader
but
on the House?
But I think people outside of Washington and major cities see quite different than the way we see it.
They see that the Congress is unable to do anything other than kick the ball down the road for 3 months and then kick it down again. Nothing's resolved. The continuing resolutions don't decide any of the issues. They just say they will postpone it for another day. I don't think the American people think that's the way you ought to govern.
Who wins the House, Bruce?
In this upcoming election? I think my view is that my view is that the Republicans retain control, but still the agenda will be set by the Democrats because they won't have a majority of Republicans in the Rules Committee to let anything come to the floor without a supermajority.
It changes given how much, if they can solidify themselves with a cushion in the U.S. Senate. All the dynamics change.
Yeah, it could,
Yeah.
but we don't know.
We're talking about a Congress that, by and large, has picked its own districts. So when we talk about some of these legislators, they actually are going back and talking to voters that they hand-selected themselves and that their friends in the legislature picked, and they gerrymandered districts for them to be as safe as possible. So there really is no accountability for a lot of these lawmakers. And going back home, there's no accountability for who they vote for Speaker anyway. So I really do think that if Republicans were very serious about actually, solving some of the problems and the issues that we have at hand in the country, they would be talking about compromise with the Democrats. And I do think that it's a little bit disingenuous that they don't do that.
Tyler O'Neill, I heard something over the last 72 hours I never thought I would ever hear. The former First Lady, Secretary of State, U.S. Senator, Hillary Clinton said that anybody engaging in misinformation and disinformation should be arrested and locked up in jail. And then I wonder, should we start with you, Mrs. Clinton? Should we start with Hillary? I mean, still dossier Tyler?
This is what I'm talking about here. I love that you bring that point up, because we can say that Republicans are playing games. When you look at it, Republicans did agree on a CR. Like, we're going into this election without a government shutdown. So I think that is already a compromise that shows some seriousness of we're going to keep funding the government. And yet at the same time, we see, and I'm thinking of Virginia's 7th congressional district, where Alexander Vindman's twin brother is on the ballot. And Alexander Vindman, who, remember, was Democrats' star witness in the first impeachment hearing against Trump, essentially blamed former President Trump for the second assassination attempt against him. And Hillary Clinton's remarks on disinformation here are following in this trend, where those on the left, those who are in control of a lot of the institutions of our culture right now, where you talk about wokeness, it's being thrust upon us from above. And that's one of the things that the American people are not happy with in the direction of our country right now. But this revolt, when you talk, many on the left are acting as though Trump is responsible for the attack on him, when I think Americans can see through that. Americans know that the left has been pushing its agenda fiercely through everything. I mean, you look at the COVID pandemic, you look at the way that our education has been turned into a battle. Like, I went to a public school, or pretty close to a public school. I'm pro public school in general, but I had to decide, and I mean, I think many parents like me look at the way our public schools are right now, and they're being indoctrinated against the beliefs that I see as American as apple pie. And when you see that, and you see inflation, you see rising prices, one of the reasons why I think Americans know they're not better off now than they were 4 years ago is because we're having this DEI agenda pushed, and then they're acting as though, companies are price gouging, when in reality, government spending has driven up prices. That same government spending is funding woke institutions that are pushing the culture war that they like to blame on conservatives, while conservative voices are being silenced as disinformation and misinformation.
Okay.
And I think Americans are tired of it.
All right. Let me, it's serious in the Middle East. The Chinese embassy there asked all its personnel, everybody, to leave Israel, to leave Lebanon. Others are asking to leave right away, to leave Israel. Is there something that's about to happen there?
Well, we know that there are no longer any red lines. I think the booby traps of the pagers, which are in widespread consumer use, the walkie-talkies, in addition to attacks now by the Houthis in Israel through drones, cyber rattling towards Iran, despite the overwhelming military force that Israel has used both in Gaza, the West Bank, and Lebanon. The war continues. We're no clear. We're not even close to any kind of ceasefire end of the war. I don't think anybody has a clue how does it end other than just try to kill everybody. And the great danger is that Iran, which probably has nuclear capability hidden, will find, and they're very extreme, and Israel also, because Netanyahu needs the war to continue in office. I think he's like 18% approval rating, that there'll be a clash, and it won't be just pagers that are an issue. And the other thing we need to worry about, Armstrong, is blowback. It could even be to the United States. You don't have to have great sophistication to put an explosive in a pager. And now, when it's accepted that the laws of war accept whether you have technical prohibitions, using consumer products to kill and injure civilians doesn't take a whole lot of money where that can happen in the United States.
Yeah, but they also killed a lot of terrorists.
The war isn't over, Armstrong.
Yeah. So finally, with you, Kierran, before I say goodbye to you, Tyler, and Bruce, is the fact that Kamala Harris refuses to debate Donald Trump on Fox. She's CNN, ABC. I don't understand the issue with her going on Fox News to debate the people. Then also, I am just, even for me, as a neutral arbiter, I am still waiting, like most Americans, for her to string together at least some sentence. I'll take a paragraph of just what her economic policies are. We just can't figure out what it is.
Well, her economic policies are the Biden economic policies. I think that was made very clear at the Democratic National Convention. I think that the focus for the Democrats has been to try to drive out their base, try to continue to enthuse their base by bringing back nostalgia for the Obama administration, and previous policies policy victories that the Democrats have been able to win over the 12 years that they've had control over the White House. So I think that they're going back to that, and I think that their plan is to try to drive out their base and then regroup after the election and figure out, where they're going to focus their first term policy focus for the Harris administration. I think that you'll see a lot of investment in public projects, specifically around, major highways, major infrastructure projects, things like that, that will solidify her support amongst labor unions, especially in the Rust Belt, basically trying to help to rebuild that blue wall and try to, be the olive branch for the Democratic Party towards organized labor. So I think you'll see a lot of, Federal Highway Administration projects, Department of Transportation projects that'll be the focus of the first term of the Harris administration, if there is one.
Let me thank my guests, Bruce Fein, Kierran Young, Tyler O'Neill, for joining us. When we come back, we'll be joined by our economic team to talk about the economics of both candidates. I'm Armstrong Williams. This is your voice, your future. We'll be back.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com.
The verboten subject is what I call it. We're racing towards bankruptcy like nothing we've ever seen before. And let me welcome my guest here tonight, Joel Griffith, who is an expert on financial regulations, and Jordan Goodman, America's Money Answers. What about this verboten subject, Joel Griffith? Why is nobody?
You're right, Armstrong. Thanks for having me. We are headed to.
May I finish? May I finish? We're gonna get to it. Don't worry. We're gonna get to it. Don't worry about it. Why are we not talking about this verboten subject, this national debt, Joel Griffith?
Well, we're not talking about it because it's such a politically difficult issue to discuss. So we know that we are close to $100,000 per person in debt in this country. We're adding to that by tens of thousands of dollars per family every year. But remedying this problem requires politically difficult choices. The primary driver of this national insolvency are the entitlement programs, things like Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. Recipients like those programs. And anytime you talk about actually reforming those, one political side makes allegations that you're trying to slash benefits for existing beneficiaries when that is not the case. But combating that misinformation requires actually explaining the cold, hard facts to the American public. And that takes time. It takes prepping for the communication. And sadly, we don't see either presidential candidate willing to discuss this problem.
You know, Jordan Goodman, it's always a pleasure to see you. You know, everybody is gloating over the Fed's recent rate cut, but I want to ask you, do you actually believe this move will have a significant impact on employment figures in the near term, or are there deeper economic concerns that might hinder job growth despite the lower rates?
Well, it's helping some. For example, the stock market has been helping. We're hitting all-time record highs, so the stock market likes it a lot. It's bringing mortgage rates down a bit. We're roughly 6%. We had been over 7%, so it's helping a bit there. It's not helping with credit cards, where you have a 25% rate, you get a 24 3/4 rate. It's not going to help you very much there. So some of it's symbolic, but at least it's a change in direction. The Fed has been raising rates for quite a while, and they kept them high for quite a while. This is the first time they've lowered rates in 4 years, and the last time they did it was during COVID. So it's a change in direction. It's not going to save people that much money.
What class of Americans, the lower class, the middle class, the upper class, really benefits from the points that you mentioned that are very beneficial about the Fed's rate cut, Jordan?
Well, the upper class. I mean, they're the ones earning something on their money. They're the ones benefiting from the stock market hitting all-time record highs. The real estate market, prices are still high. That's helping people with homes. So the lower class is not being helped by the Fed cutting rates at all. I mean, if they're paying 25% on their credit cards, it's not helping them at all. Their rates are already outrageous.
Well, isn't there a problem with that picture? Isn't it the people that we really want to help, those on the bottom rung of the ladder, because it really doesn't matter who's in the White House? As people say, the rich get richer and the poor get poor, and the poor continues to vanish. So what policies are going to actually help them? Because you cannot have a capitalistic society if you're only going to have the rich class and the middle class is disappearing. That's just not going to work, Jordan.
Well, I mean, we had some time. During Trump, the lower class did improve. Their wage gains actually were higher than those of the middle class. So that was positive to some extent. That has not really been happening under Biden here. The only solution to help the lower class is growing the economy, creating more job opportunities. The job market is relatively okay right now. We're at a 4.2% unemployment rate, historically relatively low, but it's gotten worse in the last year. A year ago, we were at 3.4%. So unemployment's gone up. And you're seeing, for example, in the technology sector, Armstrong, you're seeing a lot of people, pretty high-paid people getting laid off and having it hard for them to find other jobs. So the job market's definitely tougher than it was, say, a year ago. And that's why the Federal Reserve has been lowering rates, because they're concerned if they don't do something, then we could have a recession and have it be really tough.
But Joel, do something for whom? I mean, we can argue that cutting rates in the current inflationary environment could exacerbate inflationary pressures. How do you see this decision impacting that? And exactly what is it that this administration, anybody must do to help those on the bottom rung of the ladder, and also to save the middle class? Because without the middle class, America's doomed.
Yeah, artificially lowering interest rates, not only will it have no lasting economic benefit, it will actually result in more economic destruction by way of higher prices and distortions. If we want to actually bring inflation down and also improve the output of the American people, which results in real wage gains, we should be incentivizing investment. We should be ensuring that we're going to have affordable, abundant fossil fuel energy sources for decades to come. And we should be expanding free trade. Unfortunately, on the one side, we have the Democrat candidate that is promising to impose a wealth tax, to raise investment taxes to close to 40%, to raise the capital gains tax. All of her tax proposals are estimated to lose close to 800,000 jobs. But then the other presidential candidate is proposing 60% tariffs on Chinese imports, is threatening other tariffs on our allies. And guess what? Those are estimated to cost us more than 600,000 jobs. So her proposals will cost us more than his. But both of these economic agendas, whether it's tariffs or whether it's higher taxes and a Green New Deal, both of these are going to harm our economy.
Well, let me ask you this. Let me stick with you. What is the role of banks in this economy, Joel?
Well, the role should be ensuring that capital goes to those who can most productively use it. If you think about interest rates from a bank as the price of the capital, think about it in any other area of the economy. If you need a particular good or service and prices increase, well, then that good or service is going to go to that person who can best use it or most need it. That's the role of the banks. The banks take our deposits and then they lend it out to consumers and businesses who can make the best use of it. And that is determined by the interest rate, which if left to actually just follow market demands, it does ensure indeed that the capital goes to those who will use it best.
You know, Joe, Jordan, let me give you a scenario. I want you to think about the micro economy and analyze it from the perspective of the United States in 2007 when there was a great recession. Compared to where we are today.
Well, in 2007, things were overinflated. The housing market had been very strong for a long time. People were flipping houses. There was a lot of speculation. People thought that houses would go up forever, and they were taking on huge debt. And that all collapsed when people couldn't afford the houses they were buying. And that's what caused the mortgage-backed securities to fail, and ultimately caused Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns and the whole economy to pretty much collapse in 2008 because the housing market just got wildly overheated and then collapsed, basically. We're not in that situation at all now. I mean, the housing market is weak because people can't afford homes, but the prices of homes and the mortgage rates, we don't have an overinflated economy the way we did then. What's going up a lot now, Armstrong, is the debt, as we talked about before. I mean, we're up to $35 trillion in debt. We're adding about $1 trillion in debt every 100 days. I mean, this is just staggering. There's nothing stopping that at all. The amount of interest we're paying the debt, military spending, Medicare, Medicaid, that's what's the runaway today is the amount of debt out there.
You know, the three big questions for me for our economy, Joel, is very simple. What to produce, how to produce, and what to produce it for. Your thoughts?
Yeah, those are important questions. And in a free market economy, the private sector, private investment can determine what to produce based on the demands of the consumers. And we actually have made a lot of progress in that regards over the past 40 years, especially in terms of our country loosening up our restrictions on foreign capital investing in this country, and also in regards to international trade. If you look at the 20 years or so following implementation of the free trade agreement with Canada and Mexico, NAFTA, we saw our manufacturing sector explode. Same thing held true when China entered the World Trade Organization. We actually saw our manufacturing output surge even more. When you combine free trade with lower taxes, which we saw but both with the Reagan tax reform and also with the Trump tax cuts, if you combine free trade, free flow of capital with lower taxes and more efficient regulations, you end up with enormous economic growth. That's a big part of the reason why the middle class today is so much better off than it was just a few generations ago. We're talking about, in inflation-adjusted terms, the typical middle class family today is about $25,000 plus better off today annually than they were in the 1980s. That's a testament to the free markets. But unfortunately, of course, we see so many proposals both from the left and even those claiming on the right that would actually impose new regulations on trade, on the economy, and now with Kamala Harris's plan, even wealth confiscation.
This is Your Voice, Your Future. I'm Armstrong Williams, your moderator. Joe Griffith, Jordan Goodman, and I will return after these messages.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
You know, Joe, with industrialization and the expansion of the labor market, the middle class began to rise and make a lasting impact on society. What is happening to turn that upside down on its head today? And how can we change it to get back to that which built and allowed the middle class to grow in our nation?
Yeah, we've seen such enormous strides from 1980 right until about 2020, and that is when things began to reverse. You know, we have not seen this extensive of a decline in the standard of living for typical families since really the mid to late 1970s, when we had very high inflation as well. So if you look back over the last 3 years, the typical family, if you're a two-income earner, has lost around $4,000 in real income, but that's really understating it. I know we talked briefly about the housing side, and I think we should probably underscore this. The housing market today is the least unaffordable in American history, whether you're looking at it in terms of the housing costs themselves or the percentage of one's income that it takes to actually get a mortgage. Over the past 2.5 years, the typical all-in cost for a mortgage payment, property insurance, and property taxes has risen by $23,000 annually. It's an enormous burden on American families. I think this is actually probably the primary driver behind American family financial mayhem right now. If we want to actually return that market to a modicum of affordability, we're going to have to actually diminish the government imprint. Right now, the government-sponsored enterprises buy up the vast majority of mortgages. Our central bank has purchased more than $2 trillion of mortgages, and it has inflated that market and has made it downright unaffordable for families to get started. If we're going to return middle-class prosperity and ensure that the next generation is better off than today, we have to address both the housing problem and that government spending problem.
You know, Jordan Goodman, many of us grew up in a very strong middle class, which promoted the development of human capital and a strong, educated population. I think people forget just how much a strong middle class promotes strong education all across this country and what it does for human capital. It's important for any society to have a strong middle class.
Well, it is, and education today is in crisis, I would say. A lot of people are getting out of school without the skills they need in today's market and burdened by huge amounts of debt. 200, 300,000. You go to graduate school, you go to business school, law school, dental school, medical school, you're $400,000, $500,000 in debt. So education, which should always help people get ahead, is now considered more of a burden in many cases. And that's a big change. And you're seeing, I think, at the margin, some people saying, maybe I don't need to go to college. Maybe I don't need to take on that kind of debt. Let me get a skill. Let me go to a community college. And I think that makes sense for an awful lot of people who don't really benefit that much by taking it on all that huge amount of debt. People are paying off their student debt, Armstrong, in their 50s and 60s. There's so much of it. And it's a real burden on a lot of people.
You know, I was, Joel, I was in Little Rock, Arkansas, with crisis in the classroom last week. And I think I was so stunned at the levels of poverty and homelessness. You know, when you think of poverty, you always think about the urban areas of America. But I realized poverty is far worse in rural America than it is in urban America. And yet, there's not much of a spotlight on it and the impact that it has and what it does to the lives of people. And so much of our population, Joel, is in the rural areas of our nation.
Yes, Armstrong, and this is an area where education can truly be the great equalizer, not in terms of outcomes, but in terms of allowing everyone to seize opportunities in life, whether they're in a suburb, a city, or a rural area. You know, education choice benefits not just suburban or urban families. Education choice allows families that are even in more isolated areas to obtain higher quality education for their children because there's such a plethora of new opportunities, including micropods. We can have 10 or 11 students in one location, but that takes empowering families who are of modest means to actually afford that type of tuition, which even at a modest school can cost $10,000 plus per year. If you look at what states like Florida are doing, where almost every family qualifies for education savings accounts with money directly from the state that allows them to cover those costs. And many tens of thousands of families are taking advantage of that. Unfortunately, that has not spread nationwide yet. We need to get that into the hands of parents nationally so that even children that grow up in lower class or lower middle class environments, that even they will be able to obtain a better economic future than their parents had.
You know, Joe, I guess something that we don't talk about enough, and it's a very sensitive topic. I must tell you, being in Little Rock had a huge impact on me, is that how the poor actually impact our economy and all the programs that we put in place to try to save and to help them, and yet they become more and more, they become poor. It really doesn't impact them where they are. Talk about the impacts of the poor on our economy.
Well, you know, one of the problems, Armstrong, is that we have so many programs that have, I think, really, they were well-intentioned, but it's actually been disincentivizing those who are poorer from acquiring the skills that they need to succeed. I mean, we know for a fact that if you're from an area that is poorer, from a household that's poorer, you're more likely than others not to have a quality education. What that means is that you need to be able to take opportunities on the job to gain those skills that you really should have been taught in school. And over the last few decades, actually dating back to around 1960, we saw so many programs put in place to help with food and housing and cash transfers that oftentimes that deterred individuals from actually seeking those work opportunities. And you see people that are trapped in their own personal cycle of dependency on the government. And then, of course, children learn from their parents, whether for good or for ill. And if you don't have a parent who's been setting that right example of working and progressing up that economic ladder, you're more likely to repeat those same pitfalls. And that's why it's important, both on the federal and state level, that we re-examine these programs to find ways to be sure that it's not disincentivizing people from actually acting in a way that will better their lives long term.
You know, Jordan, a business associate of mine, Tommy, has been in town with me for the last few days. I noticed that his phone just keeps ringing. His parents keep calling. I just decided to be nosy. Ask, why do your parents keep calling you? He said, because they're worried about whether I'm safe or not. They believe America is so dangerous. It's lawlessness. You just get killed for no reason at all. And it just hit me. Of course, that's exactly what it is. People have this perception that America has become a place of lawlessness, and their family have operated businesses throughout the United States for decades and decades, but they're having second thoughts about this. And we don't even talk about how the perception of lawlessness and what's happening to America that they have on people who are abroad in their consideration, not only investing in America, but pursuing the American dream. We always think that everybody wants to come here, but it's not always the right people that want to come here that continue the prosperity of America. It's those who are coming here who wants to take for America to become a part of the American dream. Speak to that, because it really caught my attention, just the fear that people have and the perception that we've become such a lawless place.
Well, that's true, and you see, particularly in the big cities, you've had all these people coming from South America and so on, taking up hotel space and not being able to work, and they're crowding Chicago and New York and Denver and Los Angeles, adding to the homeless population, and that's dangerous in many cases. On top of that, you've got all this gun warfare that's going on. You've had 2 attempts on the former president's life in the last 2 months here. You've had one shooting after another at schools and shopping malls and so on. The people that are not doing well are reaching out and have access to guns. And you're right, people feel very unsafe these days. I agree.
Joe, can we ever change that perception? Because I don't know, I live in America, so I don't know if is that the reality of what we're becoming?
We can change that perception, but we need to change the reality of it. I remember going to law school, now it's been over 10 years ago, and so many of those students that are trained to become district attorneys, they become extremely disheartened when they begin working in these district attorneys' offices. And that's because of soft on crime, either chief prosecutors or usually the mayor or county commissioner, they're not able to actually prosecute criminals fully. They're forced to take plea deals with criminals, even though they have evidence that could ensure they remain behind bars. And then oftentimes you end up with judges that even when a jury finds a person guilty, they impose very lenient sentences on them. And something that's a particular problem to Washington, D.C., where I spent 10 years living in the district, if you talk to some of the district attorneys there, especially some of the younger ones, they'll tell you that in many instances for a lot of these crimes, a warrant's issued for the arrest. Not only is the arrest not made, but even if they're arrested, they're released, and nothing is done to ensure they actually show up for court. So it takes that person committing an even more serious crime, a more serious violent crime, for them to even spend a week behind bars.
Joe, we could go on and on and on. At some point, we begin this and we end this broadcast, and we're at that point. Let me thank Kierran. Let me thank Bruce. Let me thank Jordan. Let me thank Joe. What a wonderful discussion tonight. Thank you so much for joining us for this edition of Your Voice, Your Future. I'm Armstrong Williams.